Chapter 2. The Garden. While the others took their vacation to California, Kent instead went to Seattle. It was not his first choice, but upon the realization that he could quite literally pay for nothing himself, it was the only option he could find that even remotely fit his interests. Once there, he didn't really do much beyond walk the city for a few days, taking in as many free sights as he could. But it was nice to simply get away for the weekend. New York was off the table. He considered Italy, but after a week in England, traveling that far from home just felt like another chore. The last year had seen him abroad 3 times, to every corner of the globe. He was hardly desperate to check off the 4th. After ruling out any local races on account of timing and price, Kent chose a coast he had never seen, a city he did not know, and a culture he was just curious enough to endure. His favorite part of the trip was being away from Taylorsville. The political climate was enough to remind him of home. When he was not training or avoiding Johnny in the common room, Kent spent the rest of his summer working as many hours as Brian Bourgoin would allow. A local pipe mechanic, Brian had posted an apprenticeship ad on the school's hiring board, and though he had started at $200 a week, Kent's obvious passion for machines and eagerness to make as much money as he could led Brian to promote him to full-time, albeit with the necessary allowances to still spend afternoons with Johnny and Xander. So far they'd done over 50 projects, with Kent seeing parts of the city he had no clue even existed. The town's renovation schedule was moving to the western part of the city beyond downtown, and the pair spent virtually the entire month of July refitting pipes and plugs into new fixtures in the renovated building surrounding Veterans Square. It was not common for a vehicle to be brought into Brian's shop, but every once in a while Kent would find himself face to face with his dream job, desperate to do more than the client needed. But doing it right was more important than doing what he wanted. After all, what he really wanted was a car of his own. And so long as he did what Brian asked, he was on pace to afford said vehicle by the time October rolled around, dependent on if and when he could pass his driving test. Kent's trip to Seattle had come a week before the others left for California, and thus he'd been home when the news broke about the terrorist attacks around the country. When he learned one had been planned for Disneyland, his first honest thought had been disappointment that Johnny had just narrowly avoided a tragic end. Then his conscience kicked in, and he remembered how close his best friend would have been to the same end too. A wave of shame enveloped him until he was able to see her again. When the others finally returned home amidst a flurry of questions, and it came out that Emma and Johnny had been the ones to stop the 4th attack, Kent could not help but revert to his original feelings. This was yet another accolade to add to Johnny's list of trophies. His irritation toward Emma was somewhat pacified when he learned about her uncle, who had apparently drowned on a hunting trip in North Dakota. Between that and Riley returning to the States that Thursday afternoon, it was a busy week for the Garans. The window that had once been Wyeth's was sweltering, as had been the case for most of August. Compared to Seattle, Wyoming's heat was unrelenting, and Kent found himself thinking of insufferable snowstorms that would balance out the annual average. Even with the warm weather, the last week of summer brought the moths to the flame. The sidewalks were packed with couples walking around town in the little free time they had left. His jealousy in check, he realized that was probably how he would be spending his own afternoon. Margot was out in the common room, making herself something French. He poked his head out cautiously, always nervous to have her see him in that room. He was 3 steps past when she noticed him. "Oh," she smiled politely. "Hey, smells good," he noted, nodding at the browning pan. "What is that?" When she looked down, her smile faltered. "Barbacoa poule sauce," she said, before translating, "barbecue chicken and sauce." He found his eyebrows twisting. "That doesn't sound Quebecois." Her smile disappeared completely. "It's Haitian." Kent felt his throat swell. "Oh. Yeah." She wiped her tongue over her teeth. "First time I've tried in a while. You want help?" he offered, trying to distract her. "I'm fine," she growled. "Seriously, just because he's gone doesn't mean he never existed." Kent felt his face redden, realizing what she was implying. "I'm just trying to make sure I'm fine." He bit his tongue. Antagonizing her was the last thing he wanted. He decided to change the subject. "When are you guys heading out?" he asked as her attention turned back to the pan. She kept her head down. "For what?" Kent felt his eyes roll. "You know what," he said. Margot just kept stirring the chicken with a wooden spoon. Several seconds passed in silence, before he added, "The funeral. Riley said they were putting together a memorial service." "Of course he did," she huffed. "And no, I wasn't planning on going." This struck him as odd, but knowing how Margot had felt alongside the Garans over the summer, decided not to push the issue. However, his curiosity took over the subject. "Did they ever actually find him?" he asked. "Mark, I mean." "I figured," she said harshly. "And no. But given where he was, I doubt they're looking at it suspiciously." "They never found his body?" "No, but there was a boot in the mud," she explained. "Not hard to imagine what happened." "I've never been hunting," he shrugged. "I wouldn't know." "Well, I haven't either," Margot stated. "Doesn't take a genius to know where not to step in a slough." Kent nodded. "What does that make him?" Margot's face darkened, clearly uncomfortable with his comment. "Might not want to say that out loud," she advised. "Fair," he conceded, desperate to move on to something else after failing for the second time. "Look, I'm going out with Siobhan this afternoon," he started, considering an open invitation. Before he could finish, Margot stepped in. Her eyes were pierced, confused by the absence. "Where's Riley?" "He's in town, too," he explained. "Siobhan just said to meet her at the school in a few. I guess Riley's got to meet with Garen first before he joins us." Margot was staring at the picture shelf behind him. "He's seeing Bill first?" She perked. "I know," Kent noted. "Seems kind of effed up after everything he put him through, don't you think?" He turned his head. She was clearly distracted by something. "I mean, it's not like Riley wouldn't fight back this time," he continued. She finally looked at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Riley and Bill," he shook. "After all this time, Bill never beat him, if that's what you're getting at." The silence that followed was more awkward than Kent could have imagined. Margot was glaring at him, more offended by his implication than anything he'd ever said to her. "Oh," was all he managed to say to break the silence. "But I thought, with what Emma always... He ran away because they don't get along," she said firmly, as if it were a hill she was intending to die on. I didn't mean..." He backtracked, confused by her sudden hostility. "I just thought... I don't think Riley wants you to paint him as a victim," she said harshly, her blue eyes piercing through him. "He's not a victim." Kent held his breath. He could hear Margot's breathing intensifying. When the redness in her face started to fade, he finally let it out. He struggled to find a word, settling on a simple, "Sorry." She blinked away her anger, turning again to the picture shelf before returning to Kent with a faux smile. "I guess he's still touchy on it," she warned. "I didn't mean to snap, I just..." She took a deep breath. "Sorry, I guess I missed him more than I realized." "I get it," he nodded. "He's like your brother. I'd be a little on edge, too, if I was seeing him for the first time in, 2 years? Margot ran her tongue under her bottom lip. "A little over, yeah." Kent shrugged again. "Well, if you don't want to wait, you could always come with," he invited. "I don't think Siobhan would mind it." No, she blurted out, biting her tongue. "What?" "Nothing," she sighed, trying with every bit of her power not to let him into what she was thinking. "I'm not going to let you sit around and mope all day," he warned. "Come on." "No," she said, firmer than before. "Lisa invited me to come over and watch Walker with her." Of everything Margot had said in the last 5 minutes, this was the most surprising of all. "And you think that's a good idea?" he asked, more cynicism in his voice than he meant to convey. "You really think hanging out with a newborn is what you need?" "Don't tell me what I need," she snapped. "Who are you, my mom? How could you possibly know what I need?" Kent hung his head, exhausted. It had been like this ever since she returned to Tylersville. "You know what, Mar? Fine," he sighed, wanting nothing more than to escape out the front door and leave her behind. "You do whatever you think is right for you. I'm leaving." "No!" she reached, stopping herself before she took a second step. There was a desperation to keep him there. He knew she was desperate to have him stay, but could hardly take much more of this attitude. Kent took another deep breath. "We're fine," he calmed, holding his hands out in a peaceful gesture. "I'm not leaving you angry. I promise." At this, a switch flipped behind Margot's eyes. The harshness and anger that was there suddenly became tears. She sniffled and wiped one away with her hand. Her claws were still extended. "You promise?" she said, her eye now a smudge of black. He nodded, keeping his composure. "I promise," he repeated, leaning in to wrap her in a hug. "You sure you don't want to come with us?" She nodded, pushing him away gently. "I'm sure," she confirmed. "I want to go to Xander's." "All right," he concluded. When I'm back tonight, we'll do something. Just you and me. Her eyes narrowed, her hand wiping the other away. Like what? I don't know, he said. You've got 4 hours to decide. With that, he slipped on his shoes and opened the door. I'll see you later. There was always a bittersweet feeling when he left her. Like once she was out of his sight, he wanted nothing more than to make her feel wanted, protected. It was hard to maintain that feeling when he spent too much time around her as she was. But the lingering remained, as though Margot had a second effect, the ability to green the grass on the other side. Shaking off his emotions, he kept the door behind him and made his way down the stairs to the front doors of the residential center. It had been over 2 months since he had last seen Riley and Siobhan, and the time expecting their reunion had glorified his memory of them. He hoped neither had the same effect as Margot. Walking south, Kent moved toward the school he had so purposefully avoided all summer. He was just reaching the edge of the sidewalk when he saw her coming down the front steps. The only other time he'd seen Siobhan was in Ely, and then she had been wearing a modest black dress in respect of the occasion. Today she was wearing far the opposite, a thin gray shirt and short purple shorts, out of which came skin so white Kent considered shielding his eyes as a joke. Her thin, athletic figure made her appear taller than she actually was, though if he remembered correctly, she only stood to the base of his collarbone, slightly taller than Emma. He dragged his eyes from a black satchel at her hip up to her face, which, while less affected than back in June, was still covered in an array of acne. To her credit, she creatively tried to mask it. From a distance, her face seemed to match perfectly the brown freckles adorning her upper arms. Her hair had been up the last time, too, a look which he thought made her face look rounder and more exposed than would do her justice. Today it was down. A medium-length curtain of light brown framed her face straight down to her shoulders. The freedom of it all made her look far happier. Her face lit up in a grin that she made sarcastically larger when she made eye contact, crossing to the edge of the road to meet him. "Hiya," she said, her accent as thick as he remembered. "Sorry to make you wait. They weren't big on me trying to flip my signs to the afternoon. If I have to do mass after lunch, I'll fall asleep." He smiled, happy to be reunited with his short-time friend. "They didn't have trig in the morning?" "Oh, I'm sure they have plenty of trig," she relayed. "I'm taking calculus. I'm a senior." Ken felt his eyebrows narrow. I'm a year older than Riley," she communicated. "I turn 18 after New Year's." Ken tried to hide his embarrassment at not knowing this. After an awkward pause, he added, "So you don't have classes with anybody you know?" "Oh, I'm used to it," she grinned. "Last semester I could hardly speak the language. Took me a month to even talk to my classmates." Ken stared at her, concerned. "Geez," he breathed. "That sounds... don't pity me. I like a challenge," she bragged. "Besides, I'm still stuck with you lot for fitness and language." Her attitude broke his bashfulness. "Is the closest metro by the dorms?" she added. "I'm desperate to see the shopping center Riley's been bragging about." Kent nodded, pointing. Having traveled around the world since the August before, his impression of the city mall had lessened. "You know, there's a foreign market on Sullivan," he stated. "You might be able to find some stuff you're used to over there." Siobhan grinned even harder, her pointed canines flaring through her lips. "You don't know me very well, do you?" she pointed. "I spent all summer in Ireland. I don't need any more reminders of home. Find me a cheeseburger." Kent held in his laugh as they made their way to the monorail. 3 stops of small talk later, they exited downtown. The sun had emerged from behind the clouds as they stepped out toward the shopping center. "Blimey," she huffed, feeling the heat. "I thought Saudi was bad. At least there I could shield my skin." Kent pointed to her milky arm. "You look like you've been doing that all summer." "Have you ever been to Ireland?" she laughed. "I bet I saw the sun twice." He made a mental note to add the country to his travel list. "Where are you from again?" She cracked her neck so loudly Kent hardly heard her answer. "Germany." It took him a second to realize she was playing him. "I'm from Bray," she pounced, rolling her eyes at him. "It's just south of Dublin." He nodded, as if he had any better understanding of the country because of that. "Big city?" he wondered aloud. "If you're Irish," she joked. "You're from New York, right?" Kent nodded again. "Your neighborhood probably has more people," she said. By that point, they had arrived at Shake Shack. "Can I get a smoke shack with fries and a Coke, please?" she asked the boy behind the counter. Turning to Kent, she added, "I got this one." Trusting she was in the dark about his monetary situation, he took the gesture as a kindness and added his own order to the mix. He'd already eaten lunch, but was not about to turn down another. Can I get a name for the order? The boy asked as Siobhan swiped her card down the reader. Siobhan, she said clearly before turning to Kent and winking. Good luck, mate. 5 minutes later, another worker called out her name correctly, handing her a pair of bags on a tray. Kent followed her to a table near the edge of the food court. This is the best part, she announced, ripping the receipt from the side of the bag. She looked at it before smiling and flipping the receipt for Kent to read. Shevon, she read with a grin on her face. Shevon. That's brilliant. Kent grabbed a handful of fries out of his own bag. To be fair, I still don't know how to spell it either. Well, that's half the fun, she lavished, reaching into hers to pull out her burger. You have no idea how long it's been since I had a proper hamburger. For a girl her size, she took the largest bite Kent had ever seen. The look on her face held 1,000 emotions. After they finished eating, Kent followed her through the mall to a few different clothing shops, as he had expected. Shopping was never something he enjoyed. It reminded him too much of his mother. But something about following Siobhan made him feel a part of something. Something, at least, that felt like less of a chore than it would have been with Margot. Kent cringed at the thought of his best friend. Above anything, he wanted her to be okay, and was ashamed at the impatience he had for her. Sure, she made things harder than they needed to be, especially when he wanted nothing more than to give her the comfort of a friend she and Wyatt had given him after Liz, but he tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, and believed that she could not control the way she was acting, any more than he could contain his own moments of grief. Try again tonight, he encouraged himself. His emotions must have shown on his face. Anything I can do about it? Siobhan asked. What? He stuttered, feeling his face turn red from embarrassment. No, I don't need to know anything, she offered kindly. But if you need anyone, you know you have me and Riley now. He grit his teeth to still his emotions, nodding appreciatively. Thanks, he said, considering how much to let off his chest. As much as he hated the idea of therapy, it was times like these he was jealous of Emma and Margot. Is it the accent? She said. I'm sure it's not easy remembering what things were like a year ago when she was still here. The notion threw him off guard. What? He choked on his soda. No, it's not. His mind had been nowhere near Liz. It's Margot, he stated plainly. She's just... He took a deep breath, realizing how invested he had become in his friend. She's going through it right now, he explained. Whatever you think I'm going through about Liz, it's probably 10 times worse for her. Siobhan's brown eyes glowed in the reflection of the mall's lights. She nodded. Yeah, I can't imagine, she said. Kent looked away, struggling to keep his attention on her face. How much do you know? She shrugged. I'd guess the whole of it, she briefed. I'm not oblivious, if that's your question, but I'm also not going to go prying into a stranger's life for details about something out of my hands. He nodded. It was a harsher answer than he expected, but it was a fair one. I wish I was that lucky, he soured. You were close with him, weren't you? She raised. Kent shrugged. I thought so, he admitted. By the end, I guess he was like a brother to me. He laughed at the implication of his answer. Siobhan seemed to pick up on it, too. It's a right family affair, this squad, isn't it? She asked. Everybody's a sister or a brother to somebody else, and half you lot are dating each other. Not anymore, he thought miserably, but he kept the thought to himself. Still, whatever you're feeling, I can't imagine her, Siobhan continued. Boy and the baby, that's got to be impossible. You're telling me. Ken felt himself slide in his chair, letting the dark awkwardness of their conversation sit in silence for a long while. After a pause, Siobhan perked up and slid a hand to the black bag at her hip. Say, I don't want my first day in town to be all clouds and brack, she warned. Is there any way I can brighten things up for you? At least in the short term? Kent apologized with his eyes. Honestly, just hanging around you is great, he said. I've been alone all summer. Anything helps. Well, good. She smiled with one half of her mouth. How about a little adventure? She pulled out a black rectangle from the pouch, and after a moment of interpretation, Kent realized it was a camera. Do you like gardens? On the north side of town, roughly halfway between the airport and the embassy, sat Hudson Park. A few stops on the monorail later, The pair found themselves outside a massive garden terrace spreading a quarter of a mile in 3 directions. As was becoming custom, Siobhan led the way without waiting for Kent's approval, and made her way through the set of glass double doors and into the entry greenhouse, her bag bouncing off her purple shorts with every other step. The sound and air changed as soon as the door shut behind him. Humidity like he had never known coated Kent's skin, while the sound of hundreds of fountains and waterfalls were interlaced with birds chirping and chasing each other through the cast-iron rafters. His attention locked in fascination with another charm of the town he had never known. He almost lost Siobhan, who had rushed off to a rainbow of tulips near the edge of the room, her camera held between both hands. "I take it you've never been here before." She laughed as he returned to her side. Before he could respond, she pulled a potted flower off the edge of a brick half-wall and handed it to him, snapping a picture of him without protest. "You keeping that for yourself, or—" "You wish," she teased. And again Kent bit his lip to keep his smile from showing. "You've got an entire wall for pictures in that lounge of yours, and like 3 to show for an entire year together." How would she know that? He wondered, puzzling when she had the chance to check out the common room after landing in town. "You should see how I decorate," she boasted before turning back to the flowers. "So is that your thing?" he asked. "Photography?" She smirked. "Does everybody have a thing?" she wondered, snapping a photo of the large bulbous fern another row down. "I mean," he hesitated, "it's usually just sports, but—" "But I don't strike you as an athlete," she laughed, keeping her attention on the plants. "I never said that," he backtracked. "Well, I'm not saying you're wrong," she admitted. "I can still do wonders with a football." Kent tried to decide which version she was referring to. "What about you?" she asked. "What's your thing?" He steeled himself, trying to think of an honest answer. After what she had said about Margot, the most obvious would probably send her running. "Cars, maybe?" he questioned aloud. "I mean, I'm Italian." She perked up at this, finally twisting her attention away from her camera. "Oh, parli un po' di italiano?" Kent frowned, doing his best with context clues. "If you're asking if I speak it," he tried. "No. My mom never gave me the privilege." "Oh, that's a shame," she moaned. "We could have secret little conversations, the 3 of us." Kent smirked. "What, like Margot and Wyatt used to have?" "Did they?" Siobhan questioned. "I was more thinking about Riley switching to Spanish whenever he wants to hide something from me." Kent failed to stop a laugh from escaping. "Didn't you 2 live in Spain?" Siobhan's face lit up with glee. "Yeah. He seems to have forgotten that as soon as we moved away. It leads to some really awkward moments sometimes. Trust me." Her smile was infectious. Kent found himself reciprocating. They ventured further to the right, where a sliding glass door led them out into an outdoor sanctuary. Walled in a large square by giant carved hedges, a line of stone gargoyles adorned the side against the greenhouse. 2 steps in, Kent found himself distracted by a familiar face. Morgan McAllister was leaned against a row of bamboo stalks, her hands clutching either side of a single terracotta pot. She must not have noticed him at first. Kent held up a hand and waved, smiling politely. A second later, her eyes caught his, and she froze, turning as red as the tomatoes growing in the next row. He looked back at Siobhan, concerned by Morgan's reaction, but noted how far apart the pair were. There was nothing to suggest that they were anything more than friends on a walk. "Hey," he waved again, a grin growing from his lips at the awkwardness of it all. Suddenly Morgan sprinted further down the row, disappearing behind the giant stalks. Somewhere beyond their vision, she must have tripped, as a loud clatter of metal clanged around the courtyard. Cautious and curious, Kent poked his head down the row to make sure she was all right, but by then she had disappeared. "That was weird," he voiced aloud. Siobhan was laughing, apparently in agreement. "Who was that?" she asked. "My friend Morgan," he announced. "Why would she—" "Just your friend?" Siobhan raised, still half laughing. "Yeah, why?" "That was not the face of a friend," she joked. "I think that girl might have a thing for you." The idea made Kent start laughing too. "Morgan?" he scoffed. "She's my lunch buddy." "Oi, I thought I was your lunch buddy," Siobhan judged, putting her hands on her hips and pretending to pout. "Exactly." He shook the thought away. "Same in both, except one of us is actually taken." "Yeah, but you're not," she pointed out. "And I take it from that reaction neither is she." "Still," he laughed. Morgan? It was the only reaction he had about it. Oh, be nice. What's so bad about Morgan? Nothing, he defended, not wanting to sound mean. She's just... Just what? Siobhan had him pinned. Come on, I want to hear this. Kent tightened away his laughter. Not my type. The words hung in the air for a long while. Siobhan puckered her lips to one side, leaned back, and eyed him up and down for an uncomfortable length of time. You have impossibly high standards, don't you? Kent's words caught in his throat. By this point, he could no longer tell if she was playing with him or judging him. What's that supposed to mean? Siobhan shifted her weight to her other hip. I mean, a good-looking boy like you, single? Either you're the biggest prick I have yet to meet, or you have impossibly high standards, and no one you're interested in even has a clue you exist. Am I wrong? Yes, you are, he thought honestly, and was close to admitting as much in defense of himself, until he realized how much he would have to explain about his own feelings. It's complicated, he eventually spoke up. It's complicated, she repeated, and again Siobhan stood back and tried to put them together like a puzzle. Finally she shrugged and ran a hand through her curls. Or maybe you're gay. Whoa! He halted, so loud his voice echoed around the hedges. He started laughing again. Why would you think that? Hey, no judgment here, she teased. Not my business what goes on behind closed doors. Kent stepped forward, trying to use his height to an imposing advantage. I'm not gay, he stated firmly, wanting to quell that idea as quick as it had come out of her mouth. Don't ever say that about me again. Ever, okay? Siobhan held her hands up in apology, almost dropping her camera in the process. All right, she said. Sorry. I don't need you to play matchmaker for me, he barked. When I say it's complicated, that means it's complicated. You leave it at that. Fine, she said, almost shivering. His imposition was clearly working. I said sorry, just drop it. Thank you, he said steadfastly, falling back on his heels and stepping away from her. Another awkward silence permeated the space between them, until finally Siobhan turned toward a line of orchids and spoke like their previous conversation had never even happened. So, cars, she backtracked. What, you want to be a mechanic when you're done in the company? Kent nodded. Maybe, he said, rubbing a finger through the petals of a lily, still trying to calm himself. In a perfect world, I could get to med school. She flashed a picture before turning back to face him. Med school? Like become a doctor? Again he nodded. Yeah, he said. I don't know what I'd do, but I kind of like that sort of thing too. Siobhan turned to walk again. What does that have to do with cars? He'd been waiting for that question. Nothing, he admitted. I think I just like knowing how things work. She nodded. That's a fair answer. I'd never put the two together like that. How about you? He asked. They rounded the corner of the hedges and found themselves in a row of berry plants. What about me? She paddled. Well, you're a senior, he remembered. Where are you going after this? Siobhan reached her hand under a raspberry and snapped a picture of her palm. Well, she sighed. We haven't decided what we'll do after Tylersville, but my vote is either Germany or France. The Middle East was an adventure, but I'd like to stick to a little more local place next time. States are easy enough because of the language, though. I'd settle for Australia or New Zealand. His curiosity piqued. Yeah, how was that? He asked. I can't imagine Saudi Arabia was very fun as a white girl. You ever been? She questioned. When he shook his head, she added, Then you wouldn't exactly know now, would you? Honestly, I didn't actually mind. It was kind of interesting being back somewhere where the modesty rules they have. Wasn't too far off from how I grew up. What? He laughed. Smothered by religious misogynists? I can't say I'm a big fan of them either. Siobhan froze and cracked her neck again. With a deep breath, she turned on her heels and stood as tall as he was. All right, Kent, here's the deal, she bolstered. You don't know my family, so you're not allowed to insult them. Got it? And if joking about your sexuality is what sets you over the edge, here's mine. You will never speak ill of God in front of me. Ever. Understood? Growing tired of the awkward silences, Kent looked down into her dark eyes and nodded silently. To save him the trouble, her phone began to ring. She turned her back on him to answer. The entire conversation was in Italian. "It's Riley," she said after putting it back in her bag. "He's done with his dad. You want to come with?" Kent turned his eyes around the courtyard, feeling as though the air had lost its freshness. "No thanks," he declined. "You guys do your thing. I have other plans."